Hello, welcome to Classical Greek Latin. My name is Josh and I am the teacher for this course. This is Greek lesson number 5 and we are on chapter 3 in Crosby and Schaeffer. So Crosby and Schaeffer, they list their chapters as lessons. I call my lessons lessons. So this is lesson number 5. We have 2 lessons for the introduction. This is our 5th lesson, which brings us to chapter 3 proper in Crosby and Schaeffer. And so this lesson is going to be about the present indicative and infinitive active of omega verbs. And so that may sound complicated. It's actually a pretty simple chapter, and I'm going to try to keep it short, but it should be pretty straightforward. So let's just jump in here. Let's look at this opening sentence here. They translate it as labor begets manhood. So hoigar ponoi, if you're to look up poinoi in the lexicon, it would be ponos u ho. It means toil or labor, toil, labor, and then God means for, and then which they don't really translate over here, which is fine. And then tiktusi is the verb from tikto, which means to bear. That is this is the word that they have for the mother of God, the Theotokos. This is the word that describes when Eve has her children in Genesis. This is the verb tikto, so it's the idea of bearing or begetting, right? So that's a good translation there. So, but it's third person plural, and we'll learn that today in today's lesson. So there's our subject, ponoi, right? The labors. So that's our nominative plural, masculine. The labors or the toils. For the labors, they bear, and then there's your definite article. Now this is feminine. We have not covered the feminine nouns yet, but that is going to be accusative, singular, feminine. And then if you see here, we haven't had this word yet, but in the middle of this word, this is a compound word, so you have eu, which is a prefix, which just means well, like good. And then andri, an means like pertaining to, andros means man, right? Andrew means man. So andri is related to man, that is manhood. So that's a good translation. I don't know why they didn't put eu in there. So it would be like good manhood. So I would say the full translation would be for labor or toils begets or produces good manhood, right? So that's just for fun. But let's jump into this here. So we got section 13. Now, if you notice as you've been reading through Crosby and Schaeffer, the paragraph numberings follow. So, for example, if you were to go over to this other page, the previous page on page 6, you have, or go back to the last lesson, you have paragraph 8 here. So the numbering of the paragraphs runs through the whole book continuously, right? And then, so here we're up to 13. So in the exercises, it was 12 on the page 6, and then page 7, now we're on 13. So the numbering for the paragraphs runs cumulatively through the whole book, whereas if that makes sense. Small detail. Okay, but all grammars are set up that way. All right, the present tense. So we're talking about verbs today. So the present tense, or this tense, denotes action occurring or continuing or repeated in present time. All right, so the sample verb that they give us is pao. In the first century, this word is probably pronounced pavo, pao. Let's just stick with pao so we're consistent. So it means I stop, I am stopping, I keep stopping, I do stop. So again, there's no exact one-to-one translation from any language into another. They're giving you all these variant translations, not because this one word literally means each of these. They're just giving you a roundabout understanding of what that word meant to the ancient Greek. And of course, how you translate is going to depend on context to make the most sense of that word in a particular context, to make the most sense of that in English. All right. So present, indicative, active. I talked about the ordering here, and this is how I do like to order when I parse a verb. That is, parse means to cut it up, so we describe it, right? So it's present, so we list the tense when it happened, present, and then indicative, remember, is going to be the mood, and then the active, that means that the subject is doing this action on someone else or on a direct object, right? So it's active, so that's the voice, right? So I always parse it. Crosby and Schaeffer is parsing it this way. I recommend when I ask you, or the book asks you to parse a verb in the future, to do it in this order: the tense, the mood, and the voice, or present, indicative, active of pao. So I stop. And so here are just the endings. So the pao, the root of the word is p, alpha, upsilon, and then the omega is the first ending for the first person singular. Let's see here, come in a little closer, give you a little better view. All right. So basically what you're learning here for this verb is the endings. Now I am going to explain to you why they have the endings broken up here into, here it looks like pao men. It looks like it's broken into three parts, right? So you have the root of the word, and then you have the theme vowel, and then you have the verbal or personal ending for, this would be first person plural. Okay, let me, so I'll talk about all that in a minute. Basically, at the end of the day, bottom line, big idea is you are going to want to memorize these endings. So o, es, e, omen, ete, usi. Okay, and then that new is only used, it's tacked on, so to usin, if the next word begins with a vowel, or if this verb happens to come at the very end of a sentence. And we've seen that before, but that's what that is. It's a movable new. All right, let me mark this up a little bit. So we have first person, second person, third person, first, second, third person, right? So we have I stop, you stop, singular. He, she, it stops. Okay, now we go over to plural. We stop, you all stop, they stop. All right? Okay, so let's talk about how these endings are formed. They want us to inflect Othello. We may do that later on. But right now, let's go to paragraph 14 here. So verb structure. In the inflection of a verb, the stem is of fundamental importance. On it are built the various forms. Okay, so pao is the stem of pao, right? And then the various forms are going to be the various persons in the present, in this case, present tense, right? So tense is denoted by appropriate suffixes, which is what we're using here. These are suffixes that come at the end, right? Or prefixes. Now for the present does not have any prefixes, but we will soon get into verbs like the imperfect and the aorist, which do have letters added to the front of the word to show that it is, say, an imperfect or aorist. But don't worry about that right now. That's for later. The tense suffix of the present is called the variable vowel. Okay, so we're talking about the marker, how we know something is present tense. Okay, so the variable vowels. So they have omicron, epsilon. Okay, omicron being used before mu and nu, and epsilon everywhere else. Okay, this sounds more complicated than what it actually is. So what they're talking about here is that the omicron here tells us that this is present tense, for example. So they're talking about written omicron, present tense. Okay, so we have an omicron here, and I'm going to explain how we actually have an omicron here in just a second. Okay, but that's what they're telling us, is that the omicron tells us that, oh, this is present tense. And then the epsilon theme vowel, like say pau ete, here tells us that this is present tense, right? Okay, so the epsilon here is actually present in the second person singular and also in the third person singular. Now, I am explaining this. At the end of the day, you can just memorize these endings and know that those are present tense with which have no prefix on them, right? So just as you see here, you can just memorize o, es, e, omen, ete, usi, and that will be more than enough for you to comprehend Greek. Now, to understand a little bit about how you get an omicron to turn into an u, see, let me grab a piece of paper and I'll show you how that happens. And this can be helpful in memorizing this stuff to know how it is formed. So let me see here. All right. So let's do it this way. We got first, second, third person, and first, second, third person. And this is going to be singular over here and plural over here. Okay. So let's begin with third person plural. So how do we get the ending usi, the movable nu? How do we get usi? Where's the omicron? How does that work? So what happened here is you have the omicron, and then what was added was onsi, and then with the movable nu. Okay. So this is helpful because when that omicron combined with this nsi back in, you could say, prehistoric Greece, the nu here dropped out, and then you were left with a lengthening of the omicron to u, a diphthong, and then the c was maintained, sigma iota, and then the movable nu, of course, stays there to keep that iota from combining with a vowel of the next word or to just mark the end of a sentence. Okay, so that's how you go from omicron plus nu sigma iota to usi, right? And again, you don't have to know that to understand that usi marks the third person plural, right? But you will notice as we move forward that nu, for the aorist, for example, third person plural is going to look like that. For the imperfect, third person plural is going to look like that. So that you now know why there's no nu in the third person plural, the present. Well, actually there was, but it dropped out. And that can be, knowing that background can make the memorization process easier. Okay, let us look at second person. Okay, so second person plural, straightforward. You just have epsilon. So there's that marker, epsilon, te for third person plural, or excuse me, second person plural. And then the first person plural is straightforward. You have the omicron there, and then with the men for we, right? And then of course these are the endings you would add on to the stem of the verb. In our case, it's p, alpha, upsilon, pau, like to stop, right? Okay, so let's look at in second person plural, or excuse me, second person singular, you have es, right? So what happened there is you have, just like in second person plural, you have the epsilon marker plus the ending. So here what you have happening is you have the epsilon marker, and then you have, let's see here. Okay, and then you had the C, sigma iota added onto that. And then you are adding a sigma. So what happens is this sigma drops out, and then you have the epsilon and iota come together, and then you add that sigma. And that's how you get from epsilon cis to ace. Okay, so again, not crucial to know. You just need to know ace, but that's where it comes from. Okay. Similar thing happening here with third person singular, a. You have the same thing happening here, except that the you're not adding a sigma on the end. So you just have epsilon, and then c, and then the sigma drops out, and you're left with epsilon iota, and that's for the third person. Okay. And then you have a lengthening of the omicron to omega for first person singular. All right, so that is the phonetic shifts in the history of Greece that we get these forms. You know them because I just showed them to you, but all you have to do is just memorize these endings. O, es, e, omen, ete, usi. All right, and don't let that movable nu throw you when you see that. All right. If you have questions about that, go ahead and leave those in the comments below, and I will try to get to those. Let's go back here to the next section. All right, so a personal ending is attached to complete the verb in the present indicative active. The personal ending is clearly seen only in the first and second person plurals. Okay. All right, let's see here. Personal ending is attached to complete the verb. In the present indicative active, the personal ending is clearly seen only in the first and second person plurals. So what they're saying is first, second person plurals, you have the obvious omicron there for the theme vowel and the obvious epsilon there for the theme vowel. Everywhere else, third person plural, you went from onsi to usi, and then from SC to A, and the SCs to ace, and then the omicron lengthens to an omega here. So everything else is hidden, you can say, in phonetic shifts, but first person plural, second person plural, the theme vowels are out in the open to be seen. Okay. Again, just memorize these forms, and I recommend just writing these out by hand until you can write them out without looking at your book. But we'll talk about verb accents on paragraph 15. All right, so in paragraph 8, we saw that the accent of nouns was persistent. That of verbs is recessive. That is, let's see how Crosby and Schaeffer says this. That is, it goes back, so we're on page 8, it goes back toward the beginning of the word as far as the quantity of the ultima will permit. This means that the accent stands on the antepenult if the ultima is short, on the penult if the ultima is long. Okay? So, they're using our word ethelo here. Etholomen. Okay? So let's go ahead and use that word also. And it means to wish or be willing, right? We have that down here in our vocabulary here. Ethelo. Okay, so let's, again, with accents, remember our more rule. We have 3 mores that the Greek ear, or 3 units of sound or rhythm or syllables that the Greeks like to maintain, right? So we'll use the word, we'll go ahead and conjugate. Conjugate means put together. So we're going to take the stem, ethel. So let's do this here. Let me move this camera a little bit. Okay, there we go. So we have, first, second, third person, singular. And then we have first person, second person, third person, plural. Okay. All right, so we have ethel, smooth breathing, right? Not he, so there's no H sound there, it's just ethel. All right, and I'm going to hold off on putting the endings on. So this is the stem, to wish, be willing. I'm going to hold off putting the personal endings o, ace, a, to show you the accents all together. So let's just write our stem out for each of these persons. Ethel, ethel, Ethel. 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 Okay, so if you remember nouns, a noun's accent can be anywhere on the word, including on the very last syllable, including on the ultima syllable, right? Pothamos is a good example of this. Pothamos. And then in the lexicon, it's going to look like this, right? So pothamos, the accent is on the end. And it's going to stay there on the end, even when you change this to u from the genitive, right? So if you remember u, the acute goes to a circumflex, and the dative it goes to circumflex. If you can't do this on your own, you need to work on this and memorize this. Okay, and then you have the on, where that accent comes back on the short. But that accent stays on the ending, not because these are the inflections, but because that's where the accent was to begin with, and this is a noun, it means river, right? So then the accent is going to stay there, all right? You're never going to have, I'll qualify this, but you're never going to have an accent on the final syllable of a verb, okay? So this is a noun, this is what you call persistent, right? It's going to stay there because it can, because it must, right? Let's see here. We had anthropos. So this is a little bit review. So we have anthropos, right? And then the dictionary is going to look like this. Okay. Now note, let's put the accent there. Note that in the dictionary, this accent is on the antepenult, or it's on the first syllable, or third from last, right? That's where the accent is going to want to be, right? Because this is a noun, it means man, okay? But note here, there's a circumflex on the u from the genitive, and it's there because the accent was over that last syllable in the nominative, and so it's going to stay there in the genitive, but it's just going to lengthen because now you have a long syllable at the end instead of that short. With anthropos, you have no circumflex here, right? Because there was no accent here on the ultima. The accent here is on the ante penultima, right? So that when you go to the genitive, and we've seen this before, but this is review, when you go from that short omicron sigma to a long omicron upsilon, from a omicron to a diphthong, that accent is going to be forced back to that omega because remember, you have the more here, right? So you're going to try to keep those three more rule, right? Whereas here you have one syllable there, one syllable there. So you still have a grouping of three, right? So the accent would like to stay here on the noun, but it can't because you've lengthened the end of the word so much. It just sounds funny to have that accent, and to have that accent at the beginning with so many mores left in the word, right? So Greeks don't like more than three mores at the end of the word, right? So that's why the accent moves forward in that case for the genitive in anthropou. Okay? Whereas here in pothamos, the accent is already on the end, so it's content to be there, but it's still going to try and lengthen on these long diphthongs when you inflect it for the cases. Okay? So, verbs, the accent will never be on the final syllable, except for a verb like emi, which means I am, which is irregular, you could say, just like in English. I am, he, let's see here, you are, I am, right? Am, are, he is. So it's a very irregular verb. Similar situation in Greek, right? So emi means I am. Okay. But that's unusual. All right, so forget about that. But verbs almost never have the accent Just say never have the accent on the end. Right, so let's add our endings here. So we have omega. We'll do this one at a time, okay? So omega is long, right? So it's got 2 mores, right? Epsilon is short, 1 more, all right? So there's our 3 more, 1, 2, 3. 3 units of sound, 3 units of time. So we're going to put the accent there to hold to the 3 rule, right? Okay, so now we have ace, again, long, diphthong, epsilon iota, 2 more, 1 more. There's 3 more with the accent, okay? So with recessive, they would say the accent is trying to move as far away from the end of the word as possible, and really it's just honoring the 3 more rule, the 3 unit of measurement rule, right? Okay, and then we have another long, epsilon iota here, 3rd person, 2 more, 1 more, accent goes there, okay? So it's not that ethelo is always accented on that center syllable. It just happens to look that way because of what we're doing here on the end by adding long endings in the present tense. All right, let's go over here. This will change it up a little bit. We have omen. Okay, now we have short, 1 more, epsilon, short, 1 more, omicron, and then our short more there. So we have 1, 2, 3, still over that second epsilon in the stem of ethel, but it is now on the antepenult, 3rd from last syllable instead of the 2nd from last syllable. And that is only because we have here, in the 1st person singular, for example, a long omega on the end. Omega is always long, but you have the 2 mores there, right? So you're only going to have the accent 2 syllables from the end. Whereas here, you have short, so you can afford to have the accent be further out from the end because you still have the 3 more here, okay? So 3 more, accent. 3 more, accent. The accent here is on the penult. Accent here is on the antepenult. 2nd to last syllable, 3rd to last syllable, okay? Okay, now let's do 2nd person plural. All right, same thing here. We have epsilon 1 more, epsilon 1 more, epsilon 1 more, accent, okay, because we have 3 mores. And again, it's on the antepenult, 3rd from last, just like in 1st person plural, okay? And now let's do usi, okay? Movable new. All right, this iota here is short. We have 1 more, okay? Now, technically this omicron upsilon is a diphthong, it's long, so you have 2 more there, right? And this is where it's kind of weird, but we're still going to treat that as just 1 syllable, 1 unit, right? So real language is not regular, but we can make generalizations, rules of thumb to guide us through the learning process. So we're going to accent ethelusi there because of that short iota on the end, right? If that makes sense. We're fudging the rule a little bit with that 2 mores on the omicron upsilon. 1 more there. Okay, we did a similar thing when we did with anthropos, right? Because anthropos, 1 more for the omicron, 2 more for the omega, and then 1 more for the short alpha, right? But it's the general idea, all right? But that's how the accent works. So you have the example of Paulo written out for you in your book, and now you have ethelo written out for you, that I've written out for you as a 2nd example with a 3-syllable word instead of just the 2. Ethelo versus Paulo. Okay, we're almost done for the day. Let's see here. We're just going to talk about dative. All right, and I think you know that I don't like to complicate the descriptions we give to case function, that is dative of means, dative of direct object. And here we have dative, what are they calling this? Dative is used with many adjectives expressing friendliness, hostility, association, fitness, and the like. Okay, so dative with adjectives. Let's look at the example they give us here. And let's see here. All right, I think my screen froze for a moment. Okay, so they have polemios, ein to stratego. Okay, so hostile is the adjective, right? So they're saying here's the general in the dative form. He was so he was, there's ein, he was this adjective hostile or hateful to the general, right? So they're calling that dative with adjectives. To me, it doesn't matter what you call it. If you translate dative as to or for and understand it, and we'll get into further meanings as dative of like a means or instrument, right? Like if David killed Goliath with a sling, his sling would be in the dative, for example. But there's really no need to memorize all these different uses of the dative. It's really just intuitive. If you say to or for the general and then just translate it, hateful or hostile, he was to or for the stratego, that makes sense, right? You don't need to know this terminology up here, right? It's good to be familiar with it because all grammars use that terminology, but don't let that convolute things for you. Okay, so that's the lesson for today. This is your vocabulary here for you. So go ahead and memorize these. And remember with nouns, like, let me find a noun. Angelos, note that first gamma, I'm pronouncing like an N. We talked about that in earlier lessons. Angelos is where we get the word angel from, right? And the accent is on the antepenal, third to last syllable. All right. So it's going to want to stay there. It's going to persist there, except for the more rules, which we've talked about, right? And then you have u and then ho. So this is a noun because they show you the genitive and they give you the definite article, the. Here you have agathos, right? The accent is going to be persistent on an adjective also. And I know this is an adjective, well, because here they give us the English, means good or brave, but there's no definite article here given with the adjective, right? So adjective, agathos, angelos, u, ho, noun, okay? And then here's your verb, ago, lead, all right? I lead, or to lead. And grapho, another verb, right? So the verbs, when we get going, when you look up in a full lexicon, there are 6 forms of a verb. We are eventually going to learn all those. So for now, they're just giving us the first form, okay? They're giving us the first person indicative active present tense, right? First person singular present indicative active, okay? So first person singular, I lead, present indicative active, okay? Tense, mood, voice. Okay, grapho, another verb. That omega tells us it's a verb. Ethelo, verb. Hippos, u, ho, noun, right? Note the rough breathing there, right? H sound, hippos, right? Noun, horse. Kai is going to be your conjunction and also even. You're going to see that word a ton. Kalos, again, adjective or noun. There's no genitive provided, no definite article provided, so it is an adjective, okay? And then beautiful, honorable, fine, these are adjectives in English, right? But we know it's an adjective in Greece because it has no genitive provided and no definite article provided, okay? Now, as we move forward, you will see it'll be kalos aon, and that's going to cover feminine and neutered forms of kalos. But we'll get on to that later. For now, this is an abbreviated entry. We know this is an adjective because there's no genitive, no definite article. Okay? Kindunos, adjective or noun? Noun. Okay, and that's because we have a genitive here, the genitive form, and then the definite article, the. So we know it's a noun, it means danger. Lithos, noun. Genitive, definite article, stone. Luo, omega, that tells us it's a verb, right? Okay, so go ahead and work through the exercise here. Let me read through this, make sure there's nothing weird here, confusing. What do the portions in heavy type tell as to the person and number of the subject? Okay, so they want you to parse this down, right? What do the portions in heavy type tell as to the person and number of the subject? So they want to know who did it, first, second, or third person, and the last person. And then number, they want to know if it's singular or plural. So is it I or is it we? Is it you or you all? Is it he or they? So let's do the first one together. So usi, if you look back on the chart, usi is going to be third person. Okay, so I just write the number 3 for third person, and then I'm going to put PL for plural. Okay, so they lead. And that's all you need to do for that. It's just person and number. Third person in that case and plural. So do those other ones and then translate here for section B. And again, I will provide the answers for this on the Patreon. All right, so patreon.com/classical Greek Latin, $10 a month subscription. I go through all this in detail, give you the answers, and make sure you're doing it correctly. And let's see here. Okay, so that goes on, and then they give you translation hints. Let's see here, right, in Greek. Okay, so go ahead and do this also. And again, we've done this before. Don't let this scare you. The English is much more complicated than the Greek. So just look at the definitions they give you for the vocabulary. So all these English words are going to come from the vocabulary that you've already learned. Just stick to the plan and follow the translations that they provide for the vocabulary as you come across these words, right? So the brothers were small. So you would translate that into Greek. So go ahead and work on that, and then I'll provide the answers for that on the Patreon page. And okay, and then they give you a little bit of history here. You can read through that if you'd like. And then next week, we will be on, for us, lesson 6, but chapter 4. Okay, for next week. All right. This week was lesson 5 and chapter 3. And with present indicative active of the omega verbs. Okay, let's talk about the infinitive real quick. The infinitive just means there's no person indicated that's doing it, so it's just in this case to stop, not I stop, not you stop. We don't know who's doing it, it's just to stop, and for that ending it's just ein. Okay, so just memorize that, and that will be sufficient. But that means to stop versus I stop, you stop, he stops, we stop, you all stop, they stop. Okay? And if you were to add this ending to ethelo, it would be ethylene. Okay? To wish. All right. Okay, that is the lesson for today. If you have any comments or questions, suggestions, leave those in the comments below, and I will try to get back to those. And if you'd like help with the homework, with the exercises, subscribe to our Patreon, and I will provide you the answers there. All right, thanks for joining us today. Have a good day, and I will see you next week. Thank you.